I'd say, I said we do a little bit of injury, we do a little bit of cash, we do a little bit of insurance. That's to me the same thing. I have multiple streams of income. If something dips, if for some reason there's less car crashes and that aspect of my business dips, I can lean on the other side. If for some reason we have a catastrophic failure of the insurance system, then I have other income streams to lean on.
Let that sink in for a second. You just heard from a chiropractor who built his practice on rock solid principles. Never put all your eggs in one basket. If you're a high-earning chiropractic business owner, you know the hustle. You're constantly looking for ways to scale, to build your practice, and to build something that truly lasts. But let's be real, relying on one referral source, one type of patient, or one income stream, that's a recipe for sleepless nights and missed opportunities. Today on the Chiro X Show, we're diving deep with the incredible Dr. Paul Shrogin. And trust me, his journey is as unique as his insights. From neuroscience, yep, I said it, to mastering the art of the multiple stream chiropractic business. In this episode, Paul pulls back the curtain on how to diversify your lead source, how to bulletproof your practice against market shifts, and how to build a business that thrives no matter what's happening in the market. If you're ready to stop stressing about what if and to build a truly resilient chiropractic business, this episode's for you. Let's dive in. Dr. Paul Shrogin, welcome to the show. How you doing, man?
I'm good. Yourself?
Good. Thanks for doing this. I appreciate it. I want to kick things off with, you have a very unique journey from neuroscience to chiropractor. And although as a chiropractor listening to this, you might think of like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Like the neurology and science and chiropractic, and that all comes together. But I argue that it's actually very unique. I don't feel like I see a lot of people take such a audacious approach to like wanting to be a neuroscientist, literally, and then be like, no, I think I'm gonna do this chiropractic thing. I'd be curious, why?
Yeah, and you're right. Not a lot of people take that journey. I was dead set on neuroscience. It's my passion. It's what I wanted to do. I knew from a young age I was going into medical, and then from early high school that I wanted to be in neuroscience of some kind. By the time I was in college, it was neurosurgery. That's where I was going. So I went through my undergrad, my degrees in physiology and neuroscience. I took the MCATs. I did very well. I was on my way to med school, second round of interviews, and I started shadowing neurosurgeons. And within a couple, I realized this is not what I want my life to look like. I love the material. I love the patient care. I love what they do and how they study and who they help. But their lifestyle is rough. It's 80, 90-hour weeks minimum, always on call, away from your family. Your only hope is really to get paid enough to retire early to enjoy your life. And, that's just not what I envisioned doing. And that kind of derailed my medical journey for a minute. And it took me a year or two to figure out that I wanted to be a chiropractor, which is wild because I grew up on a ranch. We had horses, I split firewood, and I bucked hay bales. The chiropractor was kind of our family doctor. I got hurt, I went to the chiropractor. And I had a lot of respect for that person because not only did they answer all the questions about my physical health, but if I, had a weird red spot or had a rash or had something else, they were very knowledgeable. Dr. Pierce in Central California, he had the answer. He's like, hey, worry about it. Don't worry about it. Go see this person. Don't go see this person. Try this. And it was an incredible relationship. And that kind of, he knew me, he knew who I was, he knew what I needed, and he had answers beyond just the scope of my relationship with him. And as soon as that light bulb clicked that, hey, I could be a chiropractor, I'm like, this is it. Like, I'd done some research. It's got the neurology side of it, or at least it can if you do the work for it. It's got the aspect of I can have a relationship with my patients. I am more holistic minded, and I never really thought about that as I was transitioning into the medical field. That is kind of my tendency. So chiropractor felt great from the moment I decided on it. And within 3 months of deciding I think I want to be a chiropractor, I was moving from San Diego to Dallas and starting school and like pushing and going. And it's been a full sprint since then.
Did you get pushback on it when you made that decision? And the reason I ask that is because I feel like you originally going what I would consider more the traditional medical route versus going what would be more like the almost pirate routes of healthcare. Like, did you get pushback on that?
I did. Some people close to me, they worry. There's still unfortunately a negative stigma about chiropractors, which bugs the heck out of me because I don't understand it. It's not the kind of relationship I have with my patients. It's not the kind of practice I have. So it doesn't compute for me. But I did have people that were concerned about it, that were close to me. They're like, you sure you want to do this? Sure that's the path you want to take? I mean, here's your scores. Here's what you've done so far. You've got these, 97th, 98th percentile on the MCATs. You can go to pretty much any med school you want. Like, why don't you just find something else in there to do? And I'm like, but this is what I want to do. This is what I'm excited about. So there was a little pushback there, and it took a while to turn that around. Heck, some of them didn't turn around until I started having a successful business on my own. And they're like, oh, maybe he was right. I mean, it took 5 years of school or 3 years of school and, 3 to 5 years of business to get there. And then they start saying, well, maybe he's not a complete idiot.
That's how it always is. I was telling my girlfriend this the other day, is that generally speaking, for most things in life, people cheer for you in the beginning and they cheer for you in the end, but it's very rarely that they cheer for you in the middle, which is when you need them the most. Mm-hmm. I think like a marathon is a perfect example of this. Is like you start the race and the gun goes off and everyone's like, nice job. And then you have 20 plus miles of just slog.
Solitude, yeah.
And then you get to the end and they cheer you on again. And I think business is the same thing. And that's the challenge, right? Is that for most of it, you're kind of just like in the slog, doing the thing.
Yep. Well, and I think that speaks to the importance of having the right people around you, both in your personal life, surrounding yourself with the right kind of people that will support you and not necessarily blindly support you. It's good to have some challenge and make sure you're making the right decisions, especially when it seems, like it could be a wrong decision from someone's eyes. But then also wherever you are in your professional career, whatever profession you're in, to have the right kind of colleagues that have a good mindset and will challenge you to grow and be better and continue on your path and be there to support you when you're struggling. And I mean, that's where I found my most success in chiropractic school. I found a great group of friends. And I mean, we got to school at 4:35 in the morning. We lifted weights. We got on the treadmills. We started studying. We went to classes together. We stayed 2 hours after every day and reviewed all the material we went through. And, when it came time for the test, I didn't have to cram. I didn't have to worry about it. I had this group of people around me. We'd done the work. We supported each other. We kept each other on track. And when someone struggled, we picked them back up and we, brought them back along with us until it was our turn to do the same thing.
I feel like if every chiropractic program was like that, I think I'd get along pretty well in that sort of environment. Yeah. Get up, work out, do some studying, get some work done. I love that routine.
Yeah, I know still a good routine today.
Yeah, well, that's why I say that. Like, that's my life every day.
Yeah, exactly.
You had a position of a director of operations at a certain company where you learned some, I guess we could say, unique business lessons. Yeah. You mind sharing that?
Yeah, it was a great experience. It was an integrated neuro rehab facility. So we had medical, nurse practitioner, chiropractor, OT, ST, PT, all in-house. Patients came in and did, intensive work for strokes and TBI and vestibular rehabilitation and migraines and Meniere's disease and all host of, physical and neurological conditions. And it was a really incredible learning experience. As I was going through my chiropractic program on the side, I was doing my postdoc in neurology. So I was starting that material. And this program let me integrate that information. And I knew a few of my mentors that worked there that had this incredible knowledge of neurology that I could feed on and grow from and learn from. And the company was a really cool opportunity. As I went through that company, I started as a volunteer, and then I became a resident, and then I became a lead doctor, and then I got promoted until I ended up as the director of operations after a number of years. And I started to see where the company had incredible patient outcomes and great doctors and great medical workings, but the business side struggled. And ultimately, that's what brought that company down, was a failure to make good business decisions. And some of that started, they hit a couple of really big home runs their first few years. And I mean, just out of the gate, starting company, huge wins. And then they set the mentality, the people that were in charge then set the mentality that if this is how the company is going to do every year, this is my budget, this is my expenditure. And they started treating it like I'm going to exaggerate here a little bit, but like a Google or an Apple. And so when I got into my role as director of operations and I started looking at like, where's our P&L, where are our expenses? I'm looking at this stuff like, why do we have an electronic health record with a budget for 40 doctors when we employ 12? Like, why are we paying this much money for X when we do this? And they're like, well, we're under contract. How long is the contract? 8 years. Why did we sign an 8-year contract for 40 doctors? We've never had 40 doctors. They're like, well, they said we could grow into it. I'm like, you can always add licenses. Like, you don't need to do this now. So there were a number of decisions there. Looking at the Google ad spend, I'm like, great. What did we spend last month? Okay. $22,000. Awesome. How many leads did that bring in? 2. And I'm like, who's evaluating this? Like, who is in charge of looking at this spend and saying this is an appropriate way to run a business? So I learned a lot of very valuable business lessons of how not to do things. And I mean, a lot of that was in my mindset already. If you're starting a business, if you're a small business, if you're, a single owner or a small company, you need to pay attention to that stuff. And especially if you're just starting out, your best bet for success is to run a low expense business and grow into that business as you prove success and have stable profits and have room for growth. Those are the decisions that let you win in the long run and not just try and capitalize on the short run.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said about staying lean as long as possible. I mean, this is something that I'm constantly having to do, is to pull back on it. And there's a bit of a dance there too, because like sometimes I feel like I stay lean for so long that I stagnate growth because I'm not investing money back into the business, I guess you could say. Because like you're just trying to stay lean for the rainy day that inevitably will come. But at the same time, it's like there's a dance there. But I totally get what you're saying of like, it is very easy to have bloat, especially when I think you get past like 12 employees, I think is when it most commonly happens. Because I think under 12 employees is that you can more or less like manage all the day-to-days. You're all kind of working together. You're kind of symbiotic. Everyone kind of has a hand in everybody else's what they're doing. But once you get to like 13, I think what happens is you start separating into different departments, and then you make individual decisions based on that department, and you're not coming together. And I think that's where you get most of the bloat, because then all of a sudden like you have somebody in a different department hiring people they shouldn't be hiring or using tools that they shouldn't be doing. And then you look at it and you're like, what the hell are you doing? And like, I think that's where a lot of it happens personally anyways.
I agree with that. And, the direct oversight, but at the same time, if you want to grow a large business, you at some point have to get past direct oversight. And there is a very fine balance between growing a business appropriately and being stagnant because you're not spending enough or not allowing enough spend, and being bloated and not having success.
Totally. I think like the stages from 1 to 2 people, and then like 2 to 6, 6 to 12, and then like 12 to 30 is like, in my opinion, all very different skills.
Yeah, it is. And it's a transition of you as an owner or a manager or whatever you're doing, and your ability to switch into that mode as well, because you need to shift, the things you do as a small business owner with yourself or 1 or 2 employees, where you have direct oversight of pretty much everything, to starting to delegate and spread and making sure you have the right support systems. Absolutely. And if you can't make that switch as the business owner, you're not going to have success in that category, especially if, we talked a little bit about delegation. If you hold on to everything, eventually you become the bottleneck. It doesn't matter how big you are, you will stagnate your growth because you're not letting anything flow outside of you, and you're going to hit a limit at some point.
Totally. Which we'll dive deeper into in a little bit here. But before we do, I know something you have a belief on is that at some level, you said that you should kind of know all aspects of the business to be successful. What does that mean from like a practical standpoint? Like, because obviously there's a difference between knowing and also a difference between like doing all the things within the business. I'm curious as to like what that means for you.
Yeah. And I think this goes back to the same conversation we just had, which is there's a transition over time. So I'm a big fan of numbers. I'm a big fan of knowing where your business is objectively. Take the emotion out of it, have your spreadsheets, know your collections, at least in my practice, know your collections, your patient numbers, your expense ratios, what you're expecting in the future, what you're expecting in the past, your typical highs and lows. And so you can objectively track it and take as much emotion out of it as you can. But at the same time, when you start growing, there are things you have to let go of. I like the idea of, if you're a small business owner, and this is a very different conversation if you're coming into a larger business, but if you're a small business owner, start and do as much as you can. Do your own books, do as much IT work as you can, learn the systems, spend some time on the front desk, learn what needs to be done. But then as you grow, those are things that you need to let go of. You need to look at that return on investment for your time and say, where is your time most valuable? And I think that's the biggest transition, is saying, this is something I can do right now because I have the time and I have the bandwidth and it would be valuable for me to learn it. But as you grow, saying, hey, I am a more valuable player if I'm seeing new patients, if I'm treating patients, if I'm, writing blogs or content for my website, if I'm, going out and shaking hands with other doctors or meeting with, partners and lawyers and things that you do for your specific business, and starting to say, okay, well, now I need maybe not a full-time IT person, but, an on-call IT person, or I need a bookkeeper, an accountant. I may have strayed a little off topic there, but just, that transition as you grow and recognizing when you are more valuable elsewhere.
I was just recently at a conference for chiropractors called The Remarkable Practice. Great community, awesome people. And one of the things that they harped on at this one particular, they might say it at all of them, but they were really bullish on understanding your metrics. Mm-hmm. And they had a quote. I wish I could remember what it was, but it was something along the lines of something like, if you don't know your numbers, it's very stressful, or something like that, or not knowing your KPIs is stressful. I don't know, something along those lines. But so I'm curious for you, as in terms of, as somebody who likes the numbers, which is odd for a chiropractor, what do you think are the metrics that are most important for a chiropractor to be tracking within their business if they want to make sure that it grows?
Okay, well, that's a great question. I would say your most valuable numbers are your total patient visits, your new patient visits, what percentage of those new patients comes from where. So having an idea, and are you on track with this percent comes from existing referrals, from my ad sources, from, my partner referrals, total visits for the month and for the week. And I like to, I personally track average collections by case type. So, in my practice, we're about 30% personal injury and, mostly motor vehicle accidents, about 50-60% general insurance, and the rest is cash. And I know exactly how much those cases, those visits are. So I can pretty much future project my income based on what we're seeing today and how far out those fall. So having a good idea of that. And then if you start to see those numbers deviate, you can look at them and say, what's going on? Like, why am I not at 30% personal injury? Why am I not at, 60% general insurance? Why are my new patients at, 10 this month instead of my 20 expected? And start to dive into, have I lost one of these sources? So just the general numbers of how your practice is doing. I really like tracking your energy level, having some metric on that spreadsheet that just says, hey, this month I was a 2, I felt pretty slow. Or this month I was a, 5 or an 8, however you're setting it up. And just having an idea, like I felt good and I was doing good, or I didn't feel great and I was doing great. It gives you some window into how you were feeling. And I would say probably one of the more valuable metrics, if you're spending money on something to bring in income, let's say Google ads or a marketing company or, Facebook, Instagram, whatever you're spending on, knowing your ROI on that, knowing objectively, does this bring in revenue for my clinic? How much revenue, or how many leads, or how many clients does it bring in? And if that's the case, how many of those, or how much are those worth to me? And is this a valuable ad to my practice? Because if it's not a valuable ad to your practice, that needs to be changed, evaluated, cut, something. And I see a lot of doctors fail there, or struggle there. Fail is a strong word. Where, they're spending X on this and there's no results from that, or at least they don't know the results from that. And if you've got a partner that's doing it for you, that's a metric they should be giving you. If you're doing it yourself, that's a metric you should be able to find.
Sadly, I'm finding it more and more common how many practices just have a marketing budget spend, which is good, but then they spend it on, unfortunately, agencies or people that don't really give you the ROI on a lot of these things, sadly. And I don't know what the deal is with that, but it is something I've had more and more conversations with that on lately. But in terms of the numbers and tracking those, have you ever been surprised by some of the data in terms of if something was shifting, going up and down? And did you find something unique when you were like, wow, that's really odd that this adjusted in this direction and I had to adjust accordingly? I'm just curious if you've ever been surprised by the data, or it stays pretty consistent.
I've definitely been surprised by the data, and mostly it's not so much the data is changing, it's how I feel about the data. So I would say in February this year, I felt slow. Like I was sitting there thinking, I'm I've got time between patients. I'm kind of twiddling my thumbs sometimes. I'm finding other projects to work on. And I objectively felt like I was struggling. And I started to build this story in my head, like, your business is struggling. You need to be doing something different. And I looked back at the numbers. I'm like, oh no, we're busier than we've been. I just feel slow. Maybe I'm more efficient. Maybe the team is running along at a pace that we haven't been able to run at before, but my numbers were up from where I would expect them. My feelings about them were in a different place. And so I was able to immediately go back and say, okay, I need to readjust my feelings. I feel slow, and we can look at why I feel slow. And that's just, I had room for more, but room for more felt like I wasn't seeing enough, when in actuality, my business had grown and I was just feeling slow. And so it was it was a nice surprise, because you start to build that story of like, we're doing something wrong, and what am I doing wrong?
Have you ever taken a Myers-Briggs?
I have not.
Percentile? Not
in many years. The INF something tests, INFP, INFT.
Yeah.
It's been a long time.
Okay. I'd be curious how closely.
I'll do it after this and send you the results.
Yeah, please. I just, cause what you're describing feels like so much, it's very methodical and it's very logical thinking, and it's great. And it really resonates with me in a lot of ways when you're describing it, because the ability to look at it objectively as opposed to subjectively is like super valuable. And I really appreciate that. I don't think most people do that. Cause like when you're talking about rating your energy levels based on those certain months or whatever it is, like that's a really good metric, because I can definitely tell you, for me personally, that rarely do I ever feel like I'm doing enough, if ever.
Yeah.
For the most part, even if the numbers were crushing, I probably almost always feel like I could be doing more.
Yep. I am the same way.
And so, so having like actual hard data to look at and be like, oh no, I'm actually doing better than I thought, probably feels pretty good.
Yeah. Absolutely. And usually that's what it is. If I am good about my numbers and I look at those things, not only do I know that if something starts to slip, I'm going to catch it before it's a problem. Because, if you start to see your new patients dip and you're not specifically looking at those numbers, you may not know that. You may not know that for months, but that affects your future revenue streams. It affects, the number of clients you're seeing, the number of cases, et cetera. So having some idea that it's starting to happen when it starts to happen, and not when you feel like it's starting to happen, is really valuable for a business to be able to pivot and shift and change and know what's going on and correct problems and all of that.
You'd mentioned that 30 to 50% of new patients come from referrals, correct? Mm-hmm. What do you contribute that to? Like, what is it about your practice?
So we try very hard to have an absolutely wonderful patient experience. And that's, I'm sure a lot of people say that. Everything we do, from the initial communication with the patient to the way we treat them in office, the follow-up we have with them, the way we treat their case, is all cultivated to be an experience that you don't often get elsewhere. And that's a compliment I get a lot. Like, I've been to a lot of chiropractors. I've never been to a chiropractor like you.
Was it like that before you took over, or is this something that you implemented after you took over the practice?
Both. I mean, this clinic has always been successful and outcome driven and very well reviewed. And I will say, for Dr. Lawson, prior to him retiring, his practice was, mostly patient referrals. I mean, he didn't have a big web presence. He didn't have a lot of SEO. He didn't do any advertising. So it was all word of mouth and practice. And 28 years of successfully treating patients and being the guy in the community that everybody trusts. So I had a really good mentor to build on that. And I think we've expanded from there. Not only our patient referrals only generating 30 to 50% of our new patients isn't a testament to us dropping that aspect. It's us getting better in other areas and bringing in patients from new sources as well. But I think we've changed a lot at how the clinic looks and feels when you walk in. I mean, the environment, the staff, the communication, the message, and just the willingness to go above and beyond. I will say as well, I probably operate a little differently than many practices. I am very much, I want to get you well. I want to impart the knowledge of what you need to be successful so that you don't need me. And I want to get you out my door. And if out my door means, hey, you come in every 6 to 8 weeks, because you have some level of maintenance that's worthwhile based on your lifestyle and your activities, and it feels good and it helps you be successful and avoid recurrent pain. Or it's, hey, you call me in 2 years if something starts to hurt again. And that level of trust that I build with clients is harder for a business in the short run. I mean, it's less revenue than me saying, hey, you need to be in here, 20 times in the next 2 months. But I build incredible trust with these patients. I end up seeing their whole family, their sisters, their brothers, their friends, their coworkers. I end up seeing them down the road for totally random stuff, different stuff than they came in for, and hopefully not the same stuff. And often it is. And they're like, so what happened? They're like, I stopped doing some of the exercises and I started doing this again and I stopped working out. And it's like, okay, well, let's get you back on track. And so that level of trust has taken time to build. But in my opinion, it results in a very successful, very thriving long-term practice.
In the words of Naval Ravikant, if you know who that is, he says, play long-term games with long-term people. Mm-hmm. And I think that's very hard to do, but I think it's unquestionably the most powerful thing you can do is to remember that, like, this isn't somebody that you want to work with today. This is somebody you want to work with for years, if not decades.
Yep.
Like when you look at some of the most successful business people, like your Warren Buffetts or your Tony Robbins or whatever, name some big name, is like they've been doing business with similar people for 30, 40, 50 years.
Yeah.
And like if you can have that kind of time horizon, which very few people do, there's no question you're going to be successful.
Yeah, agreed. And that's what we want. And, in addition, I said neurosurgery wasn't my route. Part of that was lifestyle and patient, time and stories. I love getting to know my patients. I love knowing their stories. I love knowing their trips. I love knowing their kids' names, their sports. Not only does it help me treat, what do you do for a living? Where are you an engineer? And since COVID, you've been sitting cross-legged on your bed, on your laptop doing work, which is a number of actual patient stories. And we can very quickly understand the root of their low back pain. Or whatever it is. It not only helps me treat them better, but it's a great relationship. And, I meet friends through my practice and I get to know people. And I also love talking about pretty much anything. So I've got a patient that's a glass blower and I want to pick his brain every time he comes in. Like, what do you do? How do you do this? He's a scientific glass blower. He works, for a university and he builds these really wild glass, chemistry things, very specific things that he creates for the scientific equipment there. I have patients that are professional athletes. I have patients that are painters, roofers, and I'm going to ask questions and I'm going to learn and I'm going to have a great conversation. And it's really interesting getting to know, all the different people I work with and what do they do and how does that incorporate into the world? And those conversations are interesting to me too. So I thrive on those patient experiences as much as my patients get better in my practice.
Well, everybody's an expert in something. Mm-hmm. It was, I didn't love being an OT in general, but one of the things I really did enjoy was that aspect of it, of exactly what you said. Like, because everyone that walks through that door they have some sort of experience or knowledge or something that I could just tap into and ask questions. It's half the reason I host a podcast show. It's like, I just like talking to interesting people and hearing things that they know that I don't know. And I'm endlessly curious and it can be distracting at times, but it's fun.
Yeah, I agree.
So just so we're clear, were you working under Lawson before you took over the practice and then you took it over, or did you just buy it outright?
I did work with him for a while. We had an arrangement where I was not a part of his business. I was not an employee. I was an independent contractor. I had my own business. We just kind of made it look like we were one cohesive office. But it was all with the intent that he, when I started with him in practice, we met and made sure we were compatible and we had similar communication styles and patient treatment and mindset. And he knew that at some point in the semi-near future, he wanted to step away from clinical care and he wanted someone there that could walk into that and step into those shoes and take over the practice. So we did have separate businesses. It was, separate businesses. But when he retired, I bought it out and it looked like it was just a clean transition from a patient perspective.
And was that something that you intentionally sought out in terms of because like you wanted to step into something that was more established, or did it just like fall into your lap?
It was a combination of both. After my role as a director of operations, I wanted to step into a more traditional practice than, the integrated neuro rehab center. So I was looking for someone that was maybe in that space. I wasn't necessarily seeking out an associateship. I toyed with the idea of starting my own practice and, where would we start it and what would we do? And in the process of looking around at what was available, I found him and we connected, and I'm like, this is a perfect fit. We want to be in Austin. I was in Dallas at the time. We wanted to move to Austin. My wife's a UT grad. So this is, her Mecca. It was an easy family transition, right where we wanted to be, everything fit. So it did, in that aspect, it did fall into my lap, but I was looking for something similar, or do I move down here and start my own thing?
Okay. I was curious as to where I'm going with this is where you got your business chops. Mm-hmm. And so I'm curious as to my guess then is that there must have been some mentorship asked there before you took over the practice. Is that, am I assuming correctly?
There was some, although I will say I've got a lot of passions. I love cooking. If I wasn't a chiropractor, maybe I'd be a chef or run a restaurant somewhere.
Terrible business.
Yeah, terrible business. I agree. I'm glad I don't. And I would probably not enjoy it as much as I do now. But in the same way, if I wasn't a chiropractor, I would be perfectly happy in finance. I love numbers. I love spreadsheets. I love learning about finance. I'm an avid listener of podcasts, reader of financial podcasts and future investing and retirement and, all that stuff. And so a lot of that came from those areas. And I knew that I was going to be running a business, and I knew that my chiropractic education, as great as it was, did not prepare me to be successful as a business owner. It prepared me to be successful as a doctor and pass my boards. So that was knowledge I went and sought out, and I found, good people to listen to and good books to read. And some of it was hard learning, and some of it was, I've got a great coaching group, and part of what I like about that coaching group is the colleagues I can connect with and the people that have similar practices, similar mindsets, similar successes. And I can bounce ideas off people that have been in practice for a lot longer than I have and say, hey, how would you handle the situation? Or I'm looking at doing this. Is this a good idea? So, there was an aspect of mentorship there, but a lot of that was self-sought knowledge as well.
Okay. So partly self-taught, and then also you joined a coaching program as well. What's the program? If you don't...
Patient Mastery with Dr. Josh Wagner.
Okay. Is that specifically for chiropractors, or is it just general practice?
To my knowledge, it's specifically for chiropractors, or at least it's chiro focused. I'm not going to say it's exclusive to chiropractors. Sure. But it resonated a lot with me because his focus isn't this is the plan, this is what you do, this is what you say, this is how you pitch. It's no, we're going to give you some great communication strategies, some great business strategies, some great, let's cover all the aspects of business without locking you into this is the plan. And a lot of the coaching things I'd looked at before that were very much nope, here's our pitch, here's the script, here's what you say, here's what you do, there is no deviation. And a lot of those didn't resonate with my style of practice. So, yeah.
Let's talk about CEO time. I had a previous doctor on the show, Brad Cole, talked about something similar in terms of understanding that at one point you have your practitioner hat on and at another point you have your CEO hat on. I'm curious for you, what are the must-do activities within the CEO time that are things that you should really focus on? Because I think it's the challenge of any business owner is that you could literally do anything. Mm-hmm. So then the question is, well, what the hell do I do? So I'm curious.
So I think the most important aspect of CEO time is blocking time for the big goals, the big projects. Because if you don't do that, if you're trying to whittle away, if you're trying to whittle away at a big project between patients or on your lunch break, it never gets done. You're always distracted with emails with, oh, I'm going to check on this account. Oh, I need to answer this insurance question. So my CEO time is focused on getting ahead of whatever big project I'm working on. And that goal varies. Sometimes it's just getting the next newsletter out, which isn't a particularly big project. Sometimes it's setting social media calendars. That has all been delegated of recently. So now my CEO time is how do I change this practice for the better? What is that? Is that me brainstorming ideas? Right now it's landing pages. I want to get more information out there to improve the SEO on my website. So I am working with my team to write content for landing pages and make sure my final edits are where they need to be. And I'm spending time working on those things to get them ready for my web team to deploy. So CEO time varies, but the most important thing about it to me is tackling the big projects, because otherwise you're never going to get the big projects through. And the big projects are what drive your business.
Are you using AI at all to leverage?
Somewhat, yeah.
Okay.
I probably could do more.
Okay. Are you using it for like copywriting for the landing pages and stuff? Or what are you doing?
I use it for some content generation, some email generation. I would like to get more into the aspect of analysis. I know there's some really good information where you can, teach the AI, here's where I am, here's my business. Let's dive deeper. How can I do better? And that's a goal of mine, but it's not happened yet.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm curious. Keep me posted on what sort of tools you use. So that same conference that I went to, I connected with a couple of doctors out there, and then we had a follow-up call a couple of weeks ago. And the main topic was like, so it was funny. I was like, we were at the conference and I was putting together this LinkedIn post, and I was using AI to help generate some of the content. I never copy paste, but it's always like, it's incredible for consulting, I guess you could say.
Yeah, absolutely.
And he saw me hammering away at it. And then after like whoever was talking, he's like, hey, I was looking over your shoulder and I saw you're using with this software or whatever. And he's like, tell me more about this. And we were jamming out for a minute. And really what I found out was that there's a lot of people, especially doctors, that want to use more AI, but they just don't know how, and they don't know like where it's actually applicable. And so something I've been slowly piecing together is like a suite of tools that are specific for chiropractors, because there's, I don't know, thousands of tools out there. So the question is like, which ones and how do I actually use it? So I'm always asking and trying to find out like what tools other people are using. And I'm slowly putting together like a list of the ones that I think are the most applicable at the moment anyways. But
yeah, I'd be curious.
Yeah.
I'll say this too, kind of backtracking on CEO time a bit. I really like ranking your projects. And usually if I have a couple of things, and my coaching group taught me this, if I have a couple of things I want to look at, I'll say, hey, let me make this grid from easy to accomplish, hard to accomplish, low impact to the practice, high impact to the practice, and just start writing ideas in there. Whatever it is you want to do. Is it landing pages? Okay, that's moderately hard to accomplish, but a pretty big impact to the practice. Is it something simple like retraining your front desk on their, coaching them on their new patient script? How are they communicating, answering questions? Okay, well, that's got a really easy to accomplish task and a really high impact. And those are the things that you need to start tackling. Something that is hard to accomplish and low impact to the practice, you may feel it's valuable, but if you look at it from that metric, it's not something you should be focused on first versus all these other things that will happen faster and have better impact for you.
Yeah, something I've had to learn how to do is sometimes just let fires burn, even though it's super painful, but they're not important in the moment.
Yeah.
Very hard. Something that's often talked about on the show and is always a challenge and a topic that people are really wanting, specifically in chiropractic industry, is hiring. Mm-hmm. Like, how do you attract, recruit, and retain A players and talent? Because like that is something that I don't think ever stops. I remember I heard a doctor once say is like, always be hiring, essentially, is like always keeping your eyes out. So I'm curious as to how you guys have been able to do it.
So I wish there was a magic answer. I wish there was you go here and you can get the perfect person. It has been a challenging process, and up until recently, I have an excellent team right now. That's part of the reason I've been able to delegate and shift, and part of the reason the business has been successful is my team full of A players. Adi, Karina, and Leanne just run the show. They each have different passions, different focuses, and I've been able to say, hey, this is what you're going to do. This is what you're going to do. This is what you're going to do. And ask them, what do you want to do? Finding them was, what's the analogy? Sifting through the haystack, needle in the haystack, diamond in the rough. I used all the typical hiring platforms. It was a mess. I would say for every 100 applications I got, I could get 30 or 40 to respond when I'd reach back out to them. And, then 10 would communicate in a way that I would say, okay, let's at least do a phone interview, because some of them, they communicate back and I'm like, the way you're talking to me at a job interview doesn't feel like the way I would want you to talk to my patients if you were in my practice. And if that's the the level of care you're going to show for this, then I don't believe that's the level of care you would bring to my practice and this experience we're trying to cultivate here. So we'd get to the phone interview, and then, 10 to 20% would make it to the in-person interview. I can't tell you how many in-person interviews no-showed. And, that infuriated me so much. I'm like, why go to, at this point we've talked, we've chatted online, we've had a phone interview, we've set an in-person interview, and then you no-show me? Like, why? Just tell me you're not coming. Like, let me reschedule something else. So I wouldn't say it's an easy process. I think the better answer is finding good interview skills. Like, go, I can't teach all of them, but go listen to some podcasts on how to interview, how to, great interview questions, things that you can bring that give you a window into the person. I don't really care about your skills if you're coming into my office. I can teach you anything you need to do in my office. I care about the person you are, the personality you have, the work ethic you have, the willingness to be a part of the team, be a part of the family. All of those things are way more important and something I can't teach and I can't coach. So identifying the people that have those, and a lot of that is conversation based, and some people will trick you. They'll have a great interview and they'll prove not to be, that person after a month in your practice. But that's the interview for me, is identifying those traits, identifying the people that I think would be a great fit in the practice. And then we're going to bring you in and we're going to show you what to do. And we're going to give you a trial, a probation period where we say, does this work? And then even more important than identifying those things is then incentivizing those people to stay in your practice. As the practice is successful, as the business is successful, make them more successful. Find ways beyond just salary and compensation to grow them and to show them you care and to let them know they're part of the team. We do a minimum of a quarterly team activity, and the team gets to pick, hey, what do we want to do? We've done everything from go shooting at the shooting range to, pizza and beer to, we're planning a go-kart day. And just what are the things that let you have some fun? And with them, I try and set, we have a meeting where we say, hey, what do you want to focus on? What brings you joy? What excites you? What do you want to grow into? Because stagnation with employees is kind of boredom. Now that doesn't mean they're not doing their daily tasks and activities, but how can I grow them personally, professionally in the practice that is meaningful for them? And so, I've got this great team, and we've talked about what are your passions and what do you want to do and how can I help you achieve those things? And, one of them loves going out and marketing and meeting and, getting in front of people. I'm like, great. I don't particularly like that. I know it's a really important part of business, but it's not my favorite thing to do. And you've got a great personality for it. And you've been here long enough to know the business and be able to answer the questions that need to be answered. Let's do a little coaching on this. Let's go do a few together and let's set you loose and do it on your own. And so, that's been really impactful for her and then impactful for the business, because I've got a person out there that wants to go pitch us and wants to go set meetings or meet with people. And if they need to, set a meeting with me and things like that. So, summary, sift through that haystack until you find the right people, do your best to identify them, test them. And then when you find them and when you find they are a valuable member of your business, they're someone that's going to fight for you, someone that wants to grow you as much as you want to grow you. Just do everything you can to keep them and make them happy.
A few tactical things that I think people could take away is, these are a few that I told my fiance as a practice as well. And one of them was, I don't know a better way to describe it, but basically like breadcrumbs in, like you mentioned, I don't know if you were losing like Indeed or what you were, but you can do certain like breadcrumb things where like at the bottom of it, you could say like, email me a certain phrase at a certain address or something along those lines. And it's like, that just shows that they even like actually read the description and got like, and they can actually follow directions.
Yep.
Right. Cause you will find that 99.9% of people won't do it. And that'll automatically pre-qualify them as out, because like that just shows a lot of things, lack of attention to detail. They don't actually care, a whole bunch of things. Right. There's one little breadcrumb thing. And then the other one too, that I've seen a lot of doctors do is teach. So specifically when it comes to hiring other associates or other doctors, is if you can get involved at whatever the local college is or whatever is around in your area, and you can be a part of that community of like fresh students coming out, one, it positions you as somebody of a person of authority, but two, you can also already like pre-vet for other people that are potentially going to be hires. Cause I mean, they're going to eventually get out into the working force and be looking for probably an associate job fresh out of school. And so it can give you good insights as to like, oh, maybe so-and-so would be a good hire. They already know you. You already have that rapport, so-and-so. But those are a few tactical things that I've seen. But
I like that. I have used the breadcrumbs. I will say I have hired people that didn't succeed at the breadcrumb test. They just had a great interview and one of those has been a very successful employee and is still with me. But I had a lot of hesitance because I'm like, did you read to the bottom? Because you didn't see the thing. But I kind of broke a rule there just because everything seemed to flow so well. I will say this too, from finding chiropractic, not necessarily associates. I haven't done a lot of that, so I can't speak to that as much, but from finding chiropractic assistants, a doc in my group told me, he's like, don't put chiropractic assistant, put medical assistant. He's like, people see chiropractic assistant and they don't know what it is. They don't know what a chiropractor is. They don't know, like maybe you need a bunch of knowledge to be a chiropractic assistant. He's like, everybody knows what a medical assistant is. I will say I probably got 8 to 10 times the number of applicants for a medical assistant position, even if the title was medical assistant and immediately it said you're being hired as a chiropractic assistant for such and such chiropractic practice. If the title is medical assistant, immediately I got 10 times the candidates.
Huh. That's interesting. That's clever. So I know a big challenge you faced was when you initially took over the practice, you lost one of your primary employees. What happened? How did you navigate that?
It was tough. It wasn't a planned loss. I had communication with this person, they'd been in the practice 6 or 7 years and, they told me, they're like, no, I want to stay. And they had a good opportunity elsewhere. The timing was crap. So it was my first week alone. And I remember them coming in and saying, hey, I'm going to give you a couple days notice. I have another opportunity. And I mean, my heart dropped out of my stomach. It's my first week alone. The other doctor has just retired. I'm trying to integrate 2 patient streams. I'm busier than I've ever been, which is not as busy as I am now. But at the time it was like, how the heck do I do all this? And I'm losing my anchor employee, someone that's been there 6 or 7 years. My other employee was a hire of mine. It was a great employee. But she'd been there like 5 weeks. And so there were certainly aspects of the practice, especially the insurance, the scheduling, the billing, all the more complex stuff in the practice that were unfamiliar. I don't know, like there wasn't an easy fix there. It was nose to the grindstone. What can I do? How fast can we work? And thank God for an employee that was willing to dive in with me. And going back to compensating a person for helping grow the practice, I took care of her as best I could and more than we had agreed upon because she was doing more than we had agreed upon. All of a sudden, she was the sole person. At the same time, I was not willing to compromise my ideals on hiring and bring someone in that was a garbage fit for the practice at the wrong time, just because I needed a warm body. So it took me about 5 weeks to find the right person. And I would say that's not too long, but it was a long 5 weeks, and a lot of late nights and a lot of, I'm going to do everything I can to make this practice run with every ounce of my strength. And then at the end of the day, I'm going to go back and do all my notes and all my things that I need to do because I didn't have time to do them during the day because I was so busy, being here, being there, coaching on this, helping on this, doing this. And back to, making sure all the aspects of the practice that helped a lot, me being able to say, I know how to do these things. But that's something that I think any business owner should understand is that there's not usually an easy answer. And often the businesses that succeed are the ones that work the hardest or are willing to work the hardest, the longest, the smartest, and just put in the time. And that's what I would say that was. It was time and it was effort, it was emotion, and it was, supporting the people I could and then doing everything I needed to until late in the night until we were done.
Man, I'm sure it sure taught you a lot about resilience in that moment, if I had to guess. Because, I can only imagine, like, patients aren't going to stop coming in. Bills aren't going to stop needing to be paid. And so it's like, all right, now we need to prevail.
It taught me a little bit about capacity too, in what I thought I could handle. what I was able to. It also taught me that I really didn't like only having 2 employees. I think we talked about this once before is, why do you have 3 employees? Well, part of the reason is, we have a therapy driven practice. So my employees are generally busy throughout the day. But if one of those employees needs to be out of the practice or heck just wants to take a vacation, I don't like operating with just one. We're too busy to operate with just one. And so having that person available to cover was really important because I never wanted to be in that position again.
I'm curious, as somebody that knows data and numbers and finance and also bought a chiropractic clinic, how did you do it and what would you suggest for others? And was this like a seller finance deal? Like what was the...
No, I went and got an SBA loan, which is an interesting experience. It's a long experience to get an SBA loan.
Your story is hilariously similar to my fiance's, by the way.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, she did the SBA loan and she initially worked in the practice for a while before she took it over, but then she bought it and blah, blah, blah. And now she runs it. But yeah, your stories are very similar. But.
Nice. That was part of the idea of this conversation is the owner didn't want to do a seller financed agreement. And I don't, that's his business, his choice. I don't disagree with that. There's more risk in a seller finance thing. If the practice doesn't succeed, now he's chasing me for money. Not that he didn't have any trust in me, but it's a more sound financial decision to say, hey, there's a bank for that. That's exactly what they do. And so we just had to make sure all our ducks were in a row. I think the harder part, chiropractic businesses are surprisingly less expensive than other businesses. If you look in the business world, if you're selling, a widget business or a chip business or whatever, they go for a large percentage, 5-10 times their net sometimes. Chiropractic businesses generally don't go for that much. But part of that is because most chiropractic businesses are so goodwill driven. Your relationship isn't with AMD or, whoever the chip manufacturer is. Your relationship is with Dr. Joe or Dr. Paul. And so having someone come in here and take over is a more risky maneuver. And so in general, that deflates the price. So it makes it reasonable for someone to walk into an existing practice and get a loan for it I probably couldn't have walked out and gotten a loan for however many millions of dollars to buy a larger business, but to buy a chiropractic business with an established patient base, it was very reasonable. And we had done all the things to make that transaction successful, to make the transition, I should say, not the transition successful. I knew the patients. I'd been in there for 4 years at the time. I co-treated the patients with them. And when the time came for the transition, we made all the introductions, we made the warm handoffs. And so it was a really smooth transition for what it was.
I'm glad you brought that up because I did go into a bit of a rabbit hole at one moment of understanding the valuations of chiropractic businesses. I was very curious on this and I couldn't have said it better myself. The biggest challenge with the industry in general is that it's built on the back of the doctor themselves. Unfortunately, there's many ways around this, which I'd be curious if this is even something that you've thought about of like, how do you not make it about you, which I would argue you've actually already done a good start, even from just the branding standpoint of South Austin Chiro. So it doesn't have necessarily your name attached to it, which is a good, phenomenal start from the get-go.
Great way to start.
100%. And the other thing too, you probably already know this, but I guess for the listener is practices that are very PI case heavy are also have much lower valuations, because generally speaking, when people are looking to buy practices, like if you have to wait 6 months, year, or even years for certain payments, that's not very good. And I guess the other thing too is like, what does the reoccurring system look like in terms of like, are patients sticking around? Do they leave? Is there some sort of like reoccurring income? Is there like a membership? Is there like a wellness piece to it? Is there things of that nature? Obviously makes it a lot more attractive from a finance standpoint, but yeah.
I know there's a lot of companies that have started to do the idea of chiropractic office as a commodity, I guess maybe is a word, where they're going and buying multiple clinics and rebranding them all to the same kind of, joint model and trying to make it more of a business proposition. Then they could take that, collection of 12 clinics and go sell it to an investor that wanted an investment. They wanted to take and say, hey, I've got 12 successful chiropractic clinics. This is, now we're looking at it as a business instead of an individual practice. I also think from an individual practice standpoint, there are ways that you can be successful in that. And some of that is detaching yourself from some of that personal relationship. I'm not there in practice. I don't want to do that yet. I enjoy the relationships I have, and I don't know that I ever will be. And I think the biggest thing there is then I'm not, at least at this point, I'm not looking at my business as my exit strategy, my retirement strategy. I'm saying I know approximately what it's going to be worth. It may be a part of my retirement plan, but I need to plan for my retirement otherwise, because I'm not planning to make a huge nest egg off selling my business. Maybe someday we'll get there. Maybe I'll change my mind. Maybe I'll transition the business to be something that's more sellable. Maybe I'll just continue exactly as I'm doing, and then, have another doctor do the same thing someday, and transition to a young doctor that's looking to grow their practice. And, I'm very grateful for the person that put me in the position I am today, Dr. Lawson. Like, I would not be where I am today if it weren't for the warm start that he gave me, and the leg up and the mentorship and all those things. And I like the idea of doing that for someone else. So,
well, I think it's a good place to end then, because I was going to ask you what the future of the practice looks like, but I think you kind of described it. Is there anything else that we didn't discuss today that you wanted to make sure that we touched on, or are there any final takeaways that the listener could get from building their own practice, reaching that point of multiple 6-figure, 7-figure practice, and like any of the lessons that they could take away from you that?
So I think there's some easy wins out there. I think having a good Google presence is really important nowadays. I learned when I had a small business, Apple Maps is different than Google Maps, and you got to be on both. And things like that, like making sure your web presence matches and is congruent and reflects accurately what's going on, and going and claiming your businesses on all the different platforms, Yelp and Apple Maps and Google Maps and the other 10,000 that are out there, ZocDoc and Angie's List and all the stuff you don't think about. The more of those basic things you have, the more congruent you look, the more likely you are to show up in someone's search. I think SEO is not my expertise. I hired a team that does my SEO and stayed on top of them until I was a well-ranked business. If someone's searching for a chiropractor near me or a chiropractor in South Austin, or they type in chiropractor and they happen to be in South Austin, I should be the top 1, 2, 3 results. And making sure I have a team that was consistent with that, which is, back to what we talked about. We've done a good job building our Google reviews, which is a huge driver for us, and I think it would have happened endogenously, but it's happened a lot more because I've been vocal when I have those patient success stories. Hey, Corey, yeah, I'm so glad you're feeling better, man. I love it. It helps a lot if you would share your story online. It's way different for a patient if they come into my office and I tell them, hey, I can help this, than them reading it online and saying, hey, Dr. Paul helped me with this. And it builds a level of trust. And if you do that for us, I'd really appreciate it. And I mean, in the 3 years since Dr. Lawson has been retired, I think we've added 300 Google reviews. And aside from maybe The Joint, I'm one of the top ranked chiropractors in my area, maybe not the top ranked chiropractor that's not a franchise. And that alone, the patient experience and the willingness of my patients to share and refer and the polite ask to get that stuff has really helped build the business as well. I wish I had some other great words of wisdom. It's all floating around in there, and as soon as we hang up, I'm gonna say, "Oh, I forgot to say this, and I forgot to say this." But it's been great.
Yeah, thanks for being on the show. I mean, you're speaking my language, man. Is like I would say predominantly 99.9% of the doctors I talk to is like, yeah, referrals will always be the backbone. That comes from providing good care, and then having a few other streams of leads. Sometimes I talk to doctors that do it through Google. Sometimes I talk to doctors that do it through social. Sometimes I talk to doctors that do it through local events. I think they're all fine. But yeah, referrals, but then having multiple other streams.
Multiple streams. And, that's, I'd say, I said we do a little bit of injury, we do a little bit of cash, we do a little bit of insurance. That's, to me, the same thing. I have multiple streams of income. If something dips, if for some reason there's less car crashes and that aspect of my business dips, I can lean on the other side. If for some reason we have a catastrophic failure of the insurance system, then I have other income streams to lean on. Same thing. I have multiple referral sources coming to the business. I have, different things that support me. So I think that's important for any business.
Paul, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks, Corey.